Everyone wants success, but no one wants to start from nothing. Now imagine this. You're 12 years old, both parents gone. No money, no family, no future, just a cold boarding school bed and a name no one remembers. You won't believe this, but that boy built Rolex, the luxury brand that now defines power, excellence, and legacy. It started with a broken kid, not with privilege, not with connections, but with a pain so deep, it carved out something timeless. Most people think Rolex was born out of wealth and status, but the truth revealed, it came from trauma, from silence, from isolation. What no one tells you is that greatness doesn't begin with a silver spoon, it begins with a reason that won't let you quit. This story isn't about watches. It's about obsession, failure, resilience, and a vision that almost didn't work, and inside it, there's a hidden lesson that could completely change how you chase your goals. Because if a boy with no family, no inheritance, and no safety net could build the most respected luxury brand in the world, what's stopping you? Topic 1. Difficult childhood and overcoming. Hans Wilsdorf was only 12 when his life shattered. Both parents gone just like that. No warning, no time to prepare. He was yanked from his home, stripped of any childhood comfort, and sent off to a boarding school. Imagine being that young and waking up in a world that no longer made sense. It could have ended there, but something inside him refused to quit. It wasn't survival, it was quiet, focused rebellion. And that changed everything. While most kids his age were learning how to play games, Hans was learning how to decode life. He clung to books like they were lifelines. Math became his way of making sense of chaos. Languages became his escape routes. He'd sit for hours practicing French, English, and German until the sentences rolled off his tongue. You won't believe this, but that lonely, studious boy would later use those very skills to build a global empire. No one saw it coming, not even Hans himself. There's a hidden lesson here. Sometimes pain plants the seeds of purpose. If you've ever felt like life tossed you aside, think about Hans. He didn't have connections. He didn't inherit wealth. He didn't even have a support system. What he had was grit and an insane ability to learn faster than anyone else around him. If you're going through something dark, learn from this mistake most people make. They stop growing. Hans didn't. That's the secret behind it. He didn't try to escape the pain, he absorbed it, processed it, and transformed it into something useful. Like a blacksmith shaping steel, every blow hardened his resolve, and while other boys played, he prepared for something the world hadn't seen yet. This wasn't just about watches, it was about time itself. What really happened here wasn't luck. It was an early blueprint of obsession, forged in isolation, the truth revealed itself years later, but the foundation was set in those cold dorm rooms. The boy without a family was building an inner empire. The one thing that kept him going, a belief that someday his name would matter. He couldn't have known it then, but this small seed planted in grief was quietly cracking the surface. And the next chapter of his story, well, it's when he finally steps into the world of business. And everything starts to shift. Topic 2. First contacts with the business world. As a teenager, Hans left the safety of classrooms and stepped into something far more unpredictable, the business world. He moved to Switzerland, first to Geneva, then Les Chaux de Fonds, and if those names sound fancy, don't be fooled. These cities weren't luxury, they were factories, gears, and long hours. But for Hans, they were treasure chests of knowledge. You won't believe this, but working with pearls taught him more about precision than school ever could. He started in the pearl trade, handling tiny, flawless spheres that demanded an almost surgical eye for detail. That's where he first learned that excellence isn't a buzzword, it's a discipline. From sorting pearls, he graduated to watches. Swiss watches, and that's when everything clicked. What no one tells you is how important your first job really is. It teaches you how to see. Hans began noticing how Swiss watchmakers treated time not as a concept, but as a sacred craft. Inside a small watchmaking company, surrounded by metal tools and ticking prototypes, Hans became obsessed. He studied movements, mechanisms, finishes, Not just how things worked, but why they worked that way. That curiosity, that's the secret behind it all. While others rushed through tasks, he asked questions, he observed patterns. He learned what most people misstand. The hidden lesson stayed with him forever. It almost didn't work. Hans was a foreigner, a nobody. He didn't come from a watchmaking family. But he didn't try to fake it. Instead, he absorbed the trade like a sponge. If you're just starting out in your field, here's something to steal from Hans. Become unreasonably curious. Take apart what others take for granted. Want to understand value? Study how it's built. Want to lead? Learn how to serve first. By the time he left Switzerland, Hans wasn't just another worker, he was a craftsman in the making. He didn't have his own company yet, but something inside him had shifted. The gears had begun turning, literally and figuratively, and just like that, the boy who had once been lost in grief was about to team up with someone who would change everything. The stage was being set for a business partnership that no one saw coming. Topic 3. Foundations. Wilsdorf and Devise. In 1905, London was noisy, unpredictable, and full of opportunity. Hans Wilsdorf landed there with no riches, no brand, no business card, just a head full of ideas and the kind of ambition you don't teach. That same year, he teamed up with Alfred Davis, his brother-in-law, and they launched what would quietly become a revolution. Wilsdorf and Davis, you won't believe this, but their mission was simple: import high-quality Swiss movements and put them into stylish British watch cases. Now, here's what most people miss. Back then, wristwatches weren't taken seriously. Pocket watches dominated the market. Wristwatches seen as dainty, even feminine. But Hans saw the shift before anyone else. That's the hidden lesson. Real vision isn't about predicting the future. It's about recognizing when something old is dying. While others mocked wristwatches, Hans doubled down. He believed people wanted precision and portability. It almost didn't work, but he pushed anyway. They started small, no fancy building, no billboards. Just raw determination and Swiss craftsmanship in every piece. Their watches began to catch the attention of jewelers who wanted something fresh, something dependable. What really happened was subtle. Wilsdorf and Davis weren't just selling watches, they were redefining trust. You wore their product on your wrist every day. That kind of intimacy demanded consistency, and Hans knew it. If you're launching a business today, learn from this mistake many make: chasing flash over foundation. Hans didn't go viral. He went deep into mechanics, customer feedback, timing, and design. He tested obsessively. He refined endlessly. That's the secret behind it: obsession, not luck. Want an example? Think of brands like Patagonia or Apple. They didn't launch loud, they launched right. That was Hans' move. And just when things started to pick up, when orders were rolling in and momentum was growing, Hans realized they needed more than just reliable products. They needed something unforgettable, a name, a brand. One word that would echo through time: what no one tells you is. This next decision would define everything that came after, and that name, you already know it. Topic 4. The Rolex brand appears since 1908. Hans Wilsdorf is walking the streets of London with one question echoing in his mind: what name will the world remember? He wanted something short, sharp, easy to pronounce in any language. He tried dozens, maybe hundreds, but nothing stuck. Then one morning, as he rode on a horse-drawn omnibus, the name just came to him: Rolex. You won't believe this, but he said it sounded like a watch being wound. Just click and everything aligned. Rolex didn't mean anything at the time. That was the genius of it. No baggage, no borders. Just 5 letters, clean, bold, universal. That's what no one tells you about branding. Sometimes simplicity is the loudest statement. While others chose names rooted in heritage or location, Hans chose abstraction. Why? Because he wasn't building for England. He was building for the world. This wasn't just a name. It was a symbol of what was coming, but registering the brand was only the first step. Hans knew a name meant nothing without trust behind it. That's the hidden lesson. He didn't plaster it on everything immediately. He introduced it slowly, aligning it with performance, style, and most of all, reliability. The truth revealed itself over time. Customers weren't just buying watches, they were buying belief, and that belief? It started with 5 letters. It almost didn't work. People were skeptical. Why should they trust this new brand when established names were already dominating the scene? But Hans didn't flinch. He doubled down on quality. He made Rolex synonymous with precision, not prestige, at least not yet. What really happened was clever positioning. He didn't chase the upper class. He earned their attention through consistency, and just like that, Rolex began to appear in shop windows across Europe. Still modest, still growing, but a spark had been lit, one that would soon explode into something no one saw coming. Because Hans wasn't done innovating, not even close. His next move? It would shatter expectations and take Rolex from respected to legendary. Topic 5. Focus on accuracy and trusting. 1910. Something happened that no one expected. A Rolex wristwatch received the first Swiss certificate of chronometric precision ever awarded to a wristwatch. Before that, those certifications were reserved for larger marine chronometers, massive devices kept on ships, not strapped to wrists. You won't believe this, but Hans had just redefined what a wristwatch could be, and he wasn't even close to finished. For years later, in 1914, Rolex made headlines again. The Kew Observatory in England, known for its brutal standards, awarded a Rolex wristwatch the Class A certificate, a distinction previously given only to naval instruments. This changed everything. Suddenly, wristwatches weren't just fashion accessories, they were trusted instruments. Hans had turned a joke into a serious contender. That's the hidden lesson. Respect isn't given, it's engineered. While competitors chased trends, Hans chased time itself. He obsessed over consistency, calibration, materials, resistance to shock, temperature changes, you name it. What really happened was that Rolex began to build something rare in business: trust without compromise. He wasn't just selling watches. He was selling the feeling that, no matter what happened, your Rolex would perform flawlessly. That kind of confidence, it's priceless. Learn from this mistake that ruins many brands today: overpromise and underdeliver. Hans did the opposite. He underpromised, overbuilt, and let results speak. Want to apply this? If you're building a personal brand, stop trying to go viral. Go precise, build slow, make your word mean something. That's what no one tells you. The fastest path to influence is through reliability, not flash. By the time World War I ended, Rolex wasn't just another name in a catalog. It was becoming the gold standard for precision. But Hans had a new idea brewing: something radical. Something waterproof, because what good is accuracy if your watch drowns in the rain? That next move? It would shock the world. Topic 6. Revolutionary innovation. Oyster. Most watches weren't waterproof. Not even close. A splash of water, game over. But Hans Wilsdorf had an idea that sounded absurd to most: a completely sealed, waterproof wristwatch. You won't believe this, but he made it happen. The result: the Rolex Oyster. A name chosen to reflect its shell-like protection, tight, secure, impenetrable. It wasn't just a watch, it was a challenge to nature itself. People were skeptical. As always, what no one tells you is that innovation doesn't sell itself, you have to prove it. So in 1927, Hans did something bold. He gave an Oyster to Mercedes Gleitz, a swimmer who was about to cross the English Channel. She battled freezing water for over 10 hours. And when she emerged, the Rolex Oyster on her wrist was still ticking perfectly. That wasn't a marketing campaign. That was a shocking story. The truth revealed itself in newspaper headlines across Europe. Rolex placed a full-page ad in the Daily Mail, celebrating the achievement. Not with cheap slogans, but with evidence, with proof. That was the hidden lesson. If you want the world to believe in your product, show them what it can survive. Mercedes became the face of trust, And the oyster became a symbol of the impossible becoming real. It almost didn't work. There were leaks, design issues, manufacturing challenges. Hans pushed through them all. He kept tweaking the hermetic case, refining the screw-down crown, reworking the gaskets. Why? Because he believed the future wasn't about style, it was about resilience. This changed everything. Rolex wasn't just a brand anymore, it was becoming a movement, and that's when Hans started thinking again. If the oyster could survive the ocean, could it also power itself? No winding, no fuss. A perpetual machine driven by motion alone? The next leap was already taking shape, and once again, no one saw it coming. Topic 7. Self-loading oyster. Perpetual. While the world was still marveling at the waterproof oyster, Hans Wilsdorf unveiled something that felt like science fiction, a wristwatch that never needed winding. No battery, no daily routine, just pure motion powering the machine. You won't believe this, but Rolex had created the first self-winding mechanism with a perpetual rotor, what we now know as the Oyster Perpetual. It didn't just tell time, it used time. This wasn't just convenient, it was revolutionary. What no one tells you is that convenience creates loyalty. No one wants to wind their watch every morning. So Rolex turned everyday movement, walking, lifting, typing into fuel. The rotor spun 360 degrees, storing energy, keeping the watch ticking. It almost didn't work. Early prototypes had friction issues and durability problems, but Hans kept pushing. He always did. What really happened was an invisible transformation. Users didn't see the rotor, they didn't need to. They just noticed their watch always worked, no winding, no stress. That's the hidden lesson here. Real innovation often hides in the background. Think of wireless charging, noise-canceling earbuds, or auto-scheduled emails. You barely notice them, but once you use them, you never go back. Hans was obsessed with design that served people, not just impressed them. The Oyster Perpetual didn't scream luxury, it whispered mastery. If you want to build something people actually rely on, learn from this mistake. Don't aim for hype, aim for habit. Make your product become part of their life without effort. That's the secret behind it, and Rolex nailed it decades before user experience became a buzzword. And with this breakthrough, Rolex watches weren't just reliable. They were now nearly eternal, but the world outside, far from stable. The winds of war were rising again, and Hans was about to face challenges no watch could predict. Topic 8. Strategy in the face of world wars. During World War I, Hans Wilsdorf faced a brutal setback. Britain imposed heavy taxes on foreign imports, including Swiss watch movements. That meant Rolex watches became painfully expensive overnight. Sales plummeted, it almost didn't work, but instead of panicking, Hans made a bold move. He relocated Rolex headquarters to Geneva. You won't believe this, but that one decision saved the brand and set the stage for its global rise. What no one tells you is that wartime isn't just about survival, it's about strategy. While others were shrinking, Hans was repositioning. Geneva wasn't just neutral, it was iconic. It placed Rolex in the heart of horological tradition. And when the Second World War hit, he didn't just protect the business, he elevated its reputation with one of the most shocking stories in the company's history. British prisoners of war had their Rolex watches confiscated in German camps. Word got to Hans. What really happened next still stuns people. He sent free replacement watches to those prisoners, no questions asked. Payment only when peace came. He shipped over 3,000 watches into enemy territory. Why? Because trust, to Hans, was more valuable than profit. That's the hidden lesson here. Your brand is only as strong as your integrity. Imagine that in the middle of a war, while bombs were falling, Rolex was hand-delivering hope. That decision didn't just strengthen customer loyalty, it carved the brand into legend. If you're running a business today, learn from this mistake most founders make. They separate profit from purpose. Hans blended both, and it showed. By the time the war ended, Rolex wasn't just seen as precise or elegant, it was seen as honorable. And as peace returned to Europe, Hans was already planning what would become the next chapter in Rolex history, a chapter filled with icons, innovation, and a legacy that would outlive him. Topic 9. Brand and legacy consolidation. In peace returned, Hans Wilsdorf wasted no time. In 1945, to celebrate Rolex's 40th anniversary, he launched the date just the world's first self-winding wristwatch with an automatically changing date. You won't believe this, but it was the first time a watch truly felt alive, changing with you, adapting to your day, and that was just the beginning. Over the next decades, Rolex unveiled the Submariner 1953, Day-Date 1956, and more, each one an icon. These weren't just watches. They were statements, tools for divers, pilots, explorers, and presidents. What really happened was that Hans took Rolex beyond luxury. He made it a symbol of achievement. The Day-Date became known as the President's Watch. The Submariner, James Bond wore it. That's the hidden lesson here. If you want your product to last, tie it to identity, not just functionality. Rolex watches weren't just about time, they told who you were becoming. But Hans wasn't just building products, he was building permanence. In 1945, he quietly established the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation. And in 1960, with no children and no heirs, he did something no one saw coming. He donated all his shares in Rolex to the foundation. That meant Rolex would never be sold, never go public, never chase quarterly profits. What no one tells you is that single move locked in long-term control and independence. Imagine that one of the most powerful luxury brands on earth, owned by a foundation. It almost didn't work. Board members were skeptical, competitors laughed. But Hans wasn't chasing Wall Street, he was chasing legacy. If you want an example to follow, study this. Instead of building to sell, build to last. That's the secret behind it, and it's why Rolex is still Rolex. By the time Hans passed, his story wasn't over. Not even close. The foundation continued growing, funding education, and preserving the brand. Rolex evolved, refined, and adapted. And as time moved forward, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about watches anymore. It was about something much bigger and far more inspiring. Topic 10. Impact and inspiration. Tony. Rolex produces over 1.2 million watches every year, generating more than 10 billion Swiss francs in annual revenue. But if Hans Wilsdorf could see it now, he wouldn't just be proud of the numbers. He'd be proud of what those watches represent. You won't believe this, but Rolex has become more than a brand. It's a global symbol of precision, discipline, and resilience. Values Hans built into every gear and screw. What really happened here isn't just a story of business success, it's the story of how one orphan boy with no family, no fortune, and no guarantees shaped an industry and inspired generations. That's the hidden lesson. You don't need a perfect beginning to create an extraordinary ending. What no one tells you is that the world doesn't reward where you started. It rewards how far you're willing to go and how deeply you believe in what you're building. Today, Rolex is worn by world leaders, athletes, scientists, artists, and also by people who once had nothing, who wear it as a reminder of how far they've come. The truth revealed, Rolex isn't just about time. It's about timing when you choose to act, when you choose to persist, when you choose not to give up even when everything around you says you should. That's what Hans left behind. Not just a product, but a philosophy. Learn from this mistake so many people make today. They chase fame, money, and fast validation. But Hans chased substance, and ironically, by doing that, he got all the rest. The Rolex on your wrist isn't just built to last, it's built to remind you why you started. Just like Hans, you can turn hardship into clarity, and clarity into action, and maybe, just maybe, you'll realize that greatness doesn't come from luck. It comes from quiet, consistent effort over time, the same kind of effort that transformed a heartbroken child into the man behind the most respected watch brand in the world. But his story isn't the only one that matters, in fact. There's one story still being written, yours. So, What's your excuse? Hans Wilsdorf didn't have the right background. He didn't have parents, money, or even a home to call his own, but he had something most people ignore, a fire that never went out. Learn from this mistake thinking your circumstances define your ceiling. They don't. What really happened with Rolex wasn't luck. It was relentless focus, painful growth, and a commitment to do things better than anyone else. Now ask yourself, are you building something that lasts? Or are you still waiting for the perfect time to start? It could have ended for Hans before. It even began, but he chose to move anyway. What if you did the same? What if today, instead of watching another story, you started writing yours? Let me ask you, what legacy are you creating? What hidden lesson are you ignoring that could change your life? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone, and if you want more stories like this, stories that challenge, teach, and inspire you to rise, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because next time, the story that changes everything might be yours.